Now, for more on the World Economic Forum in Davos, Paul Nantulya, a research specialist at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, joins me live via Skype from Washington. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Esther. Thank you for having me on the show yet again.
So what do you think that the African representatives at the forum will be taking back to the continent?
Well, I think they'll be taking back three things. The one issue is the unleashing of the African private sector. I think that is an issue that was made very, very clear at the WEF. The second issue is the youth, as you mentioned rightly in your show. The youth demographic is a demographic that you simply cannot ignore. It's growing. It's a growing demographic, and it is contributing to this emerging middle class that we're starting to see on the African continent. The third is the importance of education and skills building. You cannot unleash the energy of this young demographic without looking at issues of education and skills building. So this is going to be extremely important in terms of how Africa's development partners continue to engage the continent.
Paul, there was a special focus on Africa itself, and they talked about digital revolution that will be critical for the youth of today. You know, those are digital kids growing up in the continent. How critical is that really, if you look forward to kind of job creation and advancing Africa's digital revolution?
No, I mean, this is it. I mean, we're talking about that demographic. It's very globalized, right? It's very, you look at some countries, right? The penetration rate of smartphones, right, in countries like Uganda, countries like Zambia, is close to 80%, right? These are young people, you know, they are on smartphones, they're communicating with the rest of the world, right? And they've got similar aspirations with young cohorts in other parts of the world. So it's something that you absolutely cannot ignore. I think it's important to remember, for instance, that mobile money, which we now use all over the world, is a Kenyan invention. It was invented by Kenyans in Kenya, was used there initially, right, before it spread to other parts of the world. So I think this just goes to show the level of creativity and dynamism of a demographic that simply cannot be ignored anymore.
Paul, you listened to our read on Githui-Ewart's contribution on this forum, where she talks about the need to explore partnerships with regions that have been left out of the world trade before. What are your thoughts on that, and how key is this to the continent?
Well, she's absolutely right. She's absolutely right. I mean, Africa's supply chains run through very many cities in China, many provinces in China, but they also run through places like Japan, Yokohama, for instance, Tokyo, right? Very important Africa supply chains run through there. And also, you know, we don't talk about it, but countries like Brazil and India also have important supply chains to Africa. So I think it's important to recognize that, you know, this, again, it's a young demographic that is developing with all these different supply chains. Just because you're getting a supply chain from a particular country does not mean you subscribe to the political system of that country, right? It all has to do with economics and private sector growth. So, you know, we're talking about unleashing the private sector, unleashing the energy of youth. This is where we should be focused, right? And supply chains have got to be diversified. There's no other way. Africa will not survive otherwise.
Paul, we mentioned earlier that Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is going to Africa. Beginning tomorrow, she'll be in Senegal, heading to Zambia after that, and South Africa. How significant is her trip to the continent, and what is the common denominator in these three countries?
Three common denominators. One, again, is youth. You know, the United States, as Janet Yellen mentioned, is looking at this demographic shift that has occurred on the African continent. More than 70%, 80% by some statistics, say that, you know, between the ages, you know, the majority population group that you're talking about in Africa is between the ages of 18 and 35. That's number one. Number two, it's democracy, right? Those are emerging democracies, the countries that she's going to be visiting. And the United States government has been trying to get that message across, that it would like to partner more strongly with democracies. The third is innovation, right? Some of the critical innovations that we've seen coming out of the African continent have come from those three countries and their immediate regions, right? So these are the three issues that will be that Janet Yellen is likely to focus on. Of course, it's coming against the back of the visit by the Chinese foreign minister, the new foreign minister, to 6 countries on the continent. And again, that messaging that we heard coming out of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs was also talking about these very things. So hopefully, these development partners are now starting to recognize that you have a demographic reality on the continent that simply cannot be overlooked anymore. Hopefully, it's a good news story for Africa.
Right, Paul, thank you so much for your insight.
You're welcome.
Paul Nantulya is a research specialist at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies right here in Washington.